Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is me once again, the Economancer, the high priest of the Economicon. And today I just so happen to be, with a great friend of mine, NelsoNomics, who is also another high priest of the Economicon. At this moment, I am going to take a moment to actually introduce this wonderful person because he's a dear friend of mine. I've known him for many years, but I figured right now would be a great time to introduce him. So this is NelsoNomics. He grew up near the SeaTac Airport, which is somewhere over the sea by a tack of an airport. After finishing high school, he no longer existed in a traditional high school. He worked for a year and then moved to Spokane to start school as an airline pilot. Through the University of North Dakota. That didn't work out too well, did it? Not that it went bad, but you just didn't want to do that anymore. That lasted 1 year before he turned to mathematics instead, later falling into economics, which is a love we can all share. He eventually graduated from Whitworth College with a bachelor's degree in mathematics and a minor in economics, later moving to San Diego, California to enroll in a master's program at San Diego State University, where he was offered a tuition waiver and an economic scholarship. Good on you. After finishing coursework at San Diego State University, NelsoNomics spent a summer teaching in England, where he was able to complete his internship at a California foundation, writing articles and conducting research. After this, he was offered a temporary and full-time position as a professor of economics at Community College in Bremerton, Washington. And it was during this time that he met Dr. Phil Fernandez, who holds a PhD in philosophy of religion and who formed Nelson's philosophical foundation for his later dissertation. He later enrolled in a doctoral program at City University of New York in Manhattan. And then upon completing his coursework, he ended up moving to his PhD dissertation at, I'm going to butcher this, Akamai University.
Yeah, Akamai. Yeah.
Akamai. Okay. Yes.
It's in Hawaii.
Yes. Okay. That was a mouthful. That was more than I will ever talk again. So don't ever ask me to read that again. All right. So for everybody watching, this one individual, and I know who you are, and I see you. I see you. Right. So today we're going to be talking about the Christ God, our Lord and Savior, if you take it that way, Jesus Christ, and capitalism. Now, why does this matter? So there's a big thing that's going on right now where people are talking about, there's a fly in here. I'm getting the Mike Pence. A lot of people are talking about social justice and things of these nature that are involved in the church. But what is so special about the church and capitalism? Because I know that you're probably one of the foremost experts in the relationship between Christianity and capitalism. So before we jump into any questions, can you give us a little background in the research of capitalism and Christianity?
As far as my research, anyways, well, thanks for having me on. It's good to see you again. We do go back several years, back to kind of the original, the founding of what used to be a online platform. We won't go into where that was or where it is, but yeah, that's where I actually got my ideas. I did a debate on free will, and that's basically free will, the basis of my viewpoint of the connection between economics and the Christian worldview, which is, does man have free will? And if man does not have free will, if man is just an automaton or some kind of robot, or we are simply the outcome of random chemical reactions in our head, C.S. Lewis got quite deep into this, then really there's no economics to be studied. It's just man behaving as he was pre-programmed to do. Versus if you have free will, and how can you have free will if without an immaterial world, right? The mind-brain separation, then you need free will. And if you don't have free will, again, but if you do have free will, then we can start talking about human behavior and why people act as they do, and basically economic action in general, right? So, so that was kind of the basis of, or I guess the beginnings of my views of the importance of basic Christian views and theism in general, and its necessary applications in the views of economics. Now, I actually presented this idea at a conference in New York for a libertarian scholars conference, and Joe Salerno, I liked it because Dr. Salerno, he's one of the top Austrian economics, he didn't like that very much. He kind of pushed back on that pretty hard. But but I think to be a good and consistent economist, and I'm going to emphasize the consistency, because you can be a good economist and have whatever kind of worldview you want. But if your worldview is counter to the theistic Christian worldview of free will, in the way we believe free will is, then I don't think you're very consistent with your economic views. And the fact that they do believe that people have free will, but they don't believe that people have a mind. And when I say mind, I'm talking about the immaterial mind, separate from the physical chemical brain that causes the chemical brain to make you think and do and act and stuff. Then you're gonna have a lot of problems with your consistency here. Like, how can you be just a material being and still believe that you have these human actions? So I guess that was a little kind of complicated, fumbled around way of saying that, I think, if any of that makes any sense.
No, it does. I mean, I am not opposed to that. I do think, especially in my realm of looking at all the different types of philosophical underpinnings, whether it's for economics or sociology and things of that nature, getting a broad and diverse set of beliefs to be, actually peered into is actually really important to me. And I do want to point out to people who may not be familiar with Dr. Joseph Salerno. So he is a libertarian. He does come from, this Murray Rothbard-esque libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, Ludwig von Mises Institute set of Austrians. And I am not a big fan of them. So I could understand why he would reject Christianity. So first and foremost, Austrian economics is fundamentally a rationalist point of view. And so rationalism has a real hard time in trying, in the world of like theism and stuff like that, it necessarily almost has to reject it, because you can either have the blank slate or the a priori, and because there's a priori within Austrian, they have to reject blank slate, and they also have to reject this subjective objective barrier so that they can get around reflexivity. But anyway,
yeah, and
I digress.
And there are Christians, major Austrian economists, that would describe themselves as Christian. I mean, Tom Woods is a Catholic. He actually wrote a book called The Church and the Market, and it's called The Catholic Defense of the Free Economy. And it's a good book. Tom Woods, brilliant guy. Bob Murphy, who, since the lockdown COVID stuff, I've kind of lost some of my faith in him, but he's he's a self-described Christian. And so I think one of the issues that the Austrians have is they believe, and Mises talked about it too, I believe, is that they believe that basically universal truths, right? Like humans act, and that economics is essentially a human science almost, right? And where do you get that if we're just chemical makeups here by accident, right? With no intelligence, there's no immaterial world, then there's no reason. But their whole premise is based on the axiom, and then we reason ourselves through induction, right, on to various, we go from one axiom that humans act, on we go to the higher order ideas from Austrian economics. And so how do you do that when there's no such thing as reason and logic, because those are immaterial, universal, objective laws, right? And how do you get that from a world that came here by accident with no order and no intelligence?
Absolutely. And that is a question that has to be asked. So plenty of the people who watch my show know that there's a lot of criticism of, I guess you could say, Western idealism that really started with Hegel. Hegel's speculative science or speculative reason. That was really one of the big, or I should say, one of the first Western criticisms of, religion, specifically Christianity, which Hegel, among others, saw it as like an Eastern intrusion into Western idealism. And then Marx took that, flipped it on its head, and then you have historical materialist dialecticism, etc. Then you had the Frankfurt School, flipped it back over. They still have to hate Christianity. I don't know why, even though the original Frankfurt School was like half of it that was written is written through Jewish mysticism, but yet they reject the Christian mysticism. Now that's up in the air, and that's for other people to figure out. And it's only tangential to this, but okay. So first and foremost, I guess the big questions on everybody's mind, and I'm gonna lay it out there. Why shouldn't Christians be socialists? Does the Bible not call for charity, love, compassion, and all of these things? Are we not told to do this? Isn't that what socialism is?
Yeah, absolutely. We should not be socialists. Christ was not a socialist. You're right. This is a big statement from the left that they look at Jesus as this sharing. I think if you ask a lot of people who describe themselves today as socialists, yes, well, what is socialism? They're like, it's love, it's sharing. But socialism, if you go back to Marx, socialism is that last step before you get to communism. And what is communism? It's an abolition of private property, right? I mean, if you really want to boil down Marxist ideas, socialism, communism, they're basically one and the same thing. I think we would say there's very little difference, but it's abolition of private property, right? And the Bible talks again and again about the respect for private property. In fact, let's go to the 10 Commandments. What was commandment? Was it number 7? Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not covet, right? How can you steal? Why wouldn't you be? I mean, doesn't even make sense. If you don't own anything, then where do you get the idea from stealing? Charity? How can you have charity if you don't own anything? You can't give anything away because you have nothing to give away, right? Everybody shares everything. So I think the Bible you go to Jesus' parables, a lot of the parables are talking about private property. So when they say that Jesus was a socialist, no, Jesus was not a socialist. Jesus, he's not really a capitalist, but I think he was more of an individualist, right? And socialism is an abolition of private property. It's an abolition of the individual. You look at, and I know we're probably not the greatest Ayn Rand fans, but she made some really great points in a book like Anthem, where Anthem is the abolition of the word I, and you talk about, it's just we and they. Speaking of that, right? That's what are your pronouns? We, they. So, but no, I think if one was to actually read the Bible, and they would see that there is no backing whatsoever for the ideas of socialism, which is just forced. Again, it's forced sharing, right? There's no love in socialism because you don't own anything. You can't help other people. So I think there's no individual. There's just the group, the we, and yeah, I don't think there's any Christian philosophical backing whatsoever for socialism. Because again, you go through the Bible, and you'll find ownership, you find property, you find Paul worked to make, and the idea of sharing itself, right, is that people owned stuff and they willingly, and it talks about in the early church, they took the property that they owned and they willingly gave it to the disciples so that they could continue to spread the good news, right? And I mean, we could go read the Bible and see.
Yeah, go read the Bible. There we go.
Yeah,
the end of the story. Everybody just go read the Bible. Answers it all.
Yeah, you see private property. You'll see private property there. There was a couple of parables. There was one about the rich landowner that goes in the morning and he basically, if you think of today, he would go to Home Depot and he'd bring people back to his field, and he said, "Look, I'll give you what was it, a shekel or a silver shekel or something? I'll give you a wage, right? Don't worry about it. I'll be fair." Okay. So he brings it back and he goes back later at like 11 o'clock. He goes back at 12, and he's going all throughout the day, and he's bringing everybody back to his farm to work, and he paid them a wage, right? So again, it's talking about his property, and he's paying people for their labor. He's also paying them the wage that he decides, something that he believes is fair. And so, certain people have gotten pretty deep into that parable, and it's not a socialist parable. It's, first of all, it destroys the equal pay for equal work idea, because he's paying them the same amount for different hours of labor. And so anyways, I think that one describes the idea of ownership, and you can get into a lot of the other parables where he's talking about private property and the fact. And again, I would really get back to the 10 Commandments: "Thou shalt not steal." Right? If under socialism, there's nothing to steal because nobody owns anything. How can you steal something that doesn't belong to anybody else? I'm just taking I'm consuming property that belongs to the state. So that would be the only person you could steal from. But
yeah, well, I typically hear the argument from this. I usually hear something like, well, socialism and communism, they don't care about private property. What the Bible points to is personal property, which is still essentially the same bit. You're just trying to transform words. It's this equivocation fallacy. Like, no, private property is X, but personal property is Y. Therefore, you can steal X because it's blah, 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 and it's, justice, but you can't steal Y because that's a part of someone's personal property. I've actually always hated that argument. I don't understand why they try to build that that word play. This is something that I find quite often, especially reading, critical into postmodern, as well as, some of the early existentialists, all of this stuff, the French existentialist Simone de Beauvoir, into Pierre Bourdieu, all of those individuals. They're really, really trying to push wordplay to its absolute maximum, and it makes it very difficult to try to keep up with it. Anyway.
Yeah, I think that you pointed out the personal versus private property. Private property really just covers everything that you own. I mean, this idea that an iPad is personal property and a house is private property, and somehow they're separate. It's just size, right? Size, location. It's just semantics, I guess, but it's really, there's no philosophy behind that. It doesn't make any sense to say that I can own an iPhone, because there was actually the Daily Show during Occupy Wall Street. They were kind of making fun of the fact that these people are talking about socialism, and somebody goes to a guy sitting there and says, "Hey, can this homeless person use your iPad?" This is a guy who's saying no private property, right? Let's abolish private property. And, well, can you use your iPad? And he's, no, because that's personal property. That's mine, right? But he's like, well, no, it's the same idea. Private property includes your iPad. So if you want to abolish private property, you have to give up your iPad. But it's because there's no consistency within these people, right? I think you would agree. There's no consistency. It's just, what do I want at this moment? What makes me feel good?
Yeah, I think you nailed it perfectly right there. It is, what makes me feel good? How can I use this system to empower myself over others? So let's jump into the next one, because so let's say we reject socialism, but let's just say that we want to make a more robust welfare system, right? Is there a top level of welfare that's associated with capitalism versus, let's say, Christianity, right? So I know Christians pay tithes 10% to the church. Okay. Well, it's roughly, because depending on the denomination and some other things, they may take it a little bit more, a little bit less. But let's just say broadly it's 10%. Islam has something similar. They have tithes. They also have like a yearly payment that they have to make that is a lump sum, right? So when we're talking about this, we're not even talking about socialism anymore. Now we're just going to be talking about social justice. Is there a need for social justice in Christianity? Now, this we may disagree on.
I don't think Christians should ever use the term social justice. It's not something you're going to find in the Bible. And if you look at the way it's used in modern society, it's very anti-Christian, because again, it is pretty socialistic, at least. And I would go back to the tithe itself. The tithe was applied to the Jewish people in the Old Testament. They paid 10%, and that would pay for the priests and the running of the tabernacle. For the widows and orphans, they had certain laws as well, that a landowner would not be like glean the entire field. If you drop something, you were not to pick it up, right? These are just simple ways to take care of the widows and orphans. And by the way, it didn't say pick up the grain, cut the field, and give 10%. You are forced to give 10% of your labor to the widows and orphans. No, it said the widows and orphans, they had to go glean the corners of the field. They had to go pick up the crops themselves, right? This was not like today's modern welfare where you sit at home and the government issues you a check, right? So there was work required. You had to do something. But that was very specific to the time. If you go to the New Testament, it says that Christians should give out of the goodness of their heart, right? So it really is a heart and an intent issue. And so there's no like bare minimum, there's no maximum. If you feel like God is, telling you in a way, or kind of moving you to give a check to this group or this person or something, that's more of what you're supposed to do in the New Testament times anyways.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was actually something I was going to bring up. So for those who are not aware, social justice is actually a fairly new idea in Christianity. It was never a part of it. Christianity had its own form of justice that was separate from what we consider legal or moral justice. It was, even the term itself, justice, wasn't necessarily used in early Christianity. It was righteous and righteousness. And so you didn't act in justice, and you didn't do anything in justice. You did things through righteous and righteousness. So that was like one of those word plays that got put in. And then I can't remember his name. I want to call him, it's not Schopenhauer, obviously, but I think it was Roschenhauser or whatever, somebody like that. He had kind of created like this neo-Marxist version of Christianity that later got picked up by the Sojourners. And the Sojourners wrote a bunch of stuff, and that gave way to the Lausanne movement of the 1960s into the 1970s that really pushed this like seriously critical theory of Christianity that got rid of like this Jesus of how should I say this? Jesus of righteousness and this Jesus of, I guess you could say, non-distributive justice. So the idea wasn't to distribute justice across groups or anything like that. It was specifically to not give preference to any one man, woman, child. Do not preference the poor and feel bad for them, for they have done wrong, but do not let the rich get off scot-free because they have done wrong. Everybody in the eyes of God is equal. Therefore, you cannot, apply your own personal beliefs into what is righteous and what is justice, right? And so this is kind of a fairly new idea. So really the Bible never had this calling for, social justice. And you're absolutely right. And I love that you pointed that out, that, a lot of people point to Christians need to be more charitable. And if you're so charitable, then you ought to give to the government so they can redistribute it. It never had anything to do redistribution. It was simply a way of people helping others. And there were things that you had to do to make sure that you got this help. If you were a widow, let's say like your husband went to war and died and you were 21 years old and you were a widow, nobody's going to walk out and give you free stuff. Like that wasn't happening. Go out and find somebody else. No one's going to break their back taking care of you when you can go out and get a mate and go out and do the things and still implement your life in service of the Lord. And so this rather new idea of welfare, all of it comes down to how can I manipulate Christianity, the Christian teachings to get what I want. And for me, this is probably the number one point, which I'm not opposed to welfare by any stretch of the imagination, but trying to make a Christian argument for it, I do oppose, because it's not biblical. You have to take this hermeneutical justice frame rather than actually taking the pure hermeneutics to it, which, if people don't know, hermeneutics is, some people call it the science of studying the Bible, but it's really just it's a frame of mind and a frame of reference used to understand what people are saying in the writing. I've used this along with Jungian analysis, looking at Celtic and Norse poetry. So it's actually basically, what is their system of belief at the time? Put yourself into it, and then you read the text, and then you derive from the text only what was, proper for that time and place. And you do not implement your own moral standings into it, right? And so when we implement our moral standings into the Bible, we're ultimately disagreeing with the Word of God, because we're assuming that Jesus Christ and God spoke through the people who wrote the Bible. So it's just a big mess. Anyway, sorry for that long tangent. I just wanted to get everybody up on track on some of these stuffs that they may not be familiar with. Anyway.
Yeah. No, I think you make some great points, of course, that the Bible, and in some of Jesus' parables, he's telling them not to respect the rich simply because they're rich. You see some wealthy, important person come in, you don't just move somebody out of the head of the table and say, hey, sorry, get out of your seat, we got someone more important here. He says, don't do that. But he also says that, I forget the exact story he's giving, but if a poor person sues a rich person, you don't just say guilty simply because he's rich and he's being sued by a poor. You have actual justice, right? Social justice would basically say, if a poor person sues a rich person, the rich person can afford it, the poor person needs the money, therefore you should just, by that alone, say guilty and take the money from the rich and give to the poor, right? But Jesus says, no, you shouldn't do that. There is one kind of justice, and it's justice in accordance with natural, what we might say natural law, right? So we get into, again, the economics, and there is a natural law that goes along with the way the world works and the way the world ought to be, right? Normative or positive economics. So it's very important that we pursue justice, but again, social justice is very anti-biblical, because as you said, it's pitting groups and separating people and giving different levels of justice to different groups according to where you place them on your hierarchy. Right? Again, we can talk about like if you're black female, if you're a black female lesbian, right? The importance of what you say is up here, but if you're white or you're straight, or so that's more the social justice, is saying what you have to say or your lot in life should be in accordance. The kind of justice we give you should be in accordance to these different aspects of your life. But justice says, no, we don't care about any of those things. You as a human being deserve justice.
Absolutely. So there's two things to say to that. I don't know if everybody has forgotten what justice looks like. It is a woman with a blindfold holding a scale.
Yeah.
Blind. I do not see what is in front of me. I only see the weighing of the problem at hand. Anything beyond that, anytime you're opening your eyes to see the issue at hand, you are automatically biasing your position, which, I mean, the position will always be biased just because we're humans and we're fallible. But that doesn't mean that you don't strive towards this unbiasedness, right? So we have to attempt it at best, right? So anyway, and then the second thing to that. The second thing to that is the statement of Jesus Christ saying, don't move your seat for the rich man. I think that speaks volumes to what Christianity, and I've talked about this a lot on my show about how America really didn't have a class system. It's only just now starting to build the idea of a class system, but it really didn't have a class system because it was fundamentally a large Christian country, and it didn't pull from, European heritage in so much as people came under the feudal system, right? It was a completely new country, completely new set of rules. And they said, hey, we don't do this class stuff here. Just because you're rich doesn't mean you get to sit down at the head of my table. I don't know you from Adam, homie. Just because you're richer than me, you can sit over there. You may get a better piece of bread just so I look impressive, and just so you may like me more, so you'll give me a better job. But other than that, I'm not kowtowing to anything that you ask me for. And this was like a fundamental part of this individualistic, liberty-minded America. And I think that, as we care more about this class consciousness, I really think we're getting away from that. And so that leads me into another idea. Like, class consciousness is ultimately anti-Christian because we're all the same. So why would I have a different belief system? Why would I have a different reality than you just because we're in different classes? That doesn't make any sense to me. We're all children of the Lord, correct?
Yeah, and who really got us into this whole class warfare? We go back to Marx himself. And what was Marx? Marx was one of the most anti-theistic people who ever lived, maybe, right? I mean, he was so anti-religion that's his entire premise, was fighting against God. And he just really hated the idea of God. I mean, obviously everybody knows he called religion the opiate of the masses. He said it was a useless, pointless, horrible thing. And he came up with Marxism, or he developed the ideas anyways. And that was implemented in Europe. And as you said, Europe had these classes, and he was able to use class warfare is what kind of came out of that. America never adopted Marxism because we didn't have classes. And so now you get into, in America, we have cultural Marxism, which is social justice and CRT and all these other ideas, which are anti-biblical because, again, they're saying that your skin color makes your value, right? And it's kind of, they say, oh, once it was, in the past, it used to be the white males were top of the food chain, if you will, and you move down. And now CRT is flipping it upside down and saying, well, the value of what comes out of your mouth is according to what kind of minority you are. And this comes from that cultural aspect of Marxism, dividing people not by their economic class, but by their social class, and really using this to make people fight against each other. And that's what's happened in America. And so a lot of people that talk about this idea of cultural Marxism in America today, they point to that and say that, yeah, America didn't have classes. We were always kind of, whether you're rich or poor, traditionally, you had basically the same justice system, and you were viewed similarly. Europe was not so much like that, because that never was in America. Marxism never hooked in America until they came up with this idea of cultural Marxism and really used our history, really a skewing of history to really hook into Americans' minds and really get Marxism moving. Unfortunately, because it's a horrible, horrible thing. I know nothing in world history has killed more people than Marx's ideas.
That's true. At least in my opinion. I know some people may disagree. Right. Some people say, people's like, oh, well, that black book, it overestimates stuff, and it takes into account that, the famine of Mao Zedong wasn't actually
caused by Mao and his Marxist ideas.
Right. And so the idea was how to like disaggregate that. And it's just like, okay, well, let's take socialism, for example, which, man, I don't know if anybody's ever read. So for everybody out there, if you ever have a chance, actually read up on the sociology of Germany from 1933 to 1945. You'll actually see where the Frankfurt School, those neo-Marxists are actually kicked out of Germany. And you'll see the growth of this really terrible sociology. One of the main points is, one, that capitalism is evil. It was invented by the West. So the Germans refer to everyone west of them as evil Westerners, right? So first of all, that's evil. Christianity is evil because it comes from the East, right? They called it the Sand People's religion, for lack of a better term, and I hope I don't get banned for that. But again, I'm just trying to give the context of what was being going on. That's why a lot of the neo-pagans, they'll refer to him as Christ God. And I've worked in and done a lot of stuff in that area, and I'm I'm actually very fluent in a lot of, the poetas and stuff like that. But anyway, so there was that growth of that neo-paganism that rejected Christianity, rejected capitalism, and rejected socialism. But it didn't reject socialism in all forms. So it said, what are the good things about capitalism and what are the good things about socialism? How can we amalgamate these ideas and come up with this grand scheme that was just literally just an internal contradiction of nonsense? And then you have people like Heidegger and a few others that are like, okay, well, we don't know a way to marry this, so we're going to create essentially, which is the German version of critical race theory, right? So that's actually what Heidegger built from the existentialists. And it was Jean-Paul Sartre read a lot of his stuff, criticized it, but said, all the ideas are good, but I don't know how I feel about it. And then Jacques Derrida and and Foucault and all those guys, they actually got a hold of it and they said, this is a really good criticism. Let's just remove the German. Let's put it in whatever we want. And then, Angela Davis ended up getting a hold of stuff written by Marcuse. And then, Judith Butler from Foucault. And then now you have gender and queer theory and critical race theory. And despite what most people think, they're actually just as fundamentally neo-Marxist. They're also fundamentally just as Nazi, but nobody wants to point to that because no one wants to actually go back and read the literature. I was actually reading a literature review of it, and the guy goes, well, I'm not going to actually bring up what they say because this is something that you can't use in modern parlance and modern sociology. We don't refer to race in this way. We don't refer to this in this way. So this is too problematic to actually go through, but we'll tell you what Lukács and Horkheimer had said about it post action. It's just like, really? That is such a strange way to go about not talking about the thing that is actually the godfather of what you're presenting. Anyway, so yeah, that was a weird thing.
Foucault was early 1800s, I think, right?
No. Foucault was 1960s. That's Foucault, Derrida, Michel Foucault, who's the father of...
The guy that influenced Marx.
No, so the guy that influenced Marx is Hegel. That's...
But also... because I was listening to Wretched Radio, and they were going through this as well.
Yeah, well, he was also the physiocrat. There might have been a Foucault from the physiocrats, because the physiocrats were actually a big influence on Hegel. Marx, because he wanted to have this historical materialism because he couldn't maintain Hegelian idealism, that dialectic idealism, because under idealism, it just rejects religion. But historical materialism lets you reject religion and also go, oh, rich people bad. And then when it flipped back over, that's why we have it intervening into religion again, because it was fundamentally from a religious perspective, flipped into the material, then flipped back into the religious perspective. And now it's attached itself to Christianity, because Christians don't actually read the Bible anymore. They just go to church and the pastor tells them something, and this pastor has a doctorate from a place that tells him that hermeneutics should be rejected in favor of your reflective position within the Bible, which doesn't make any sense and defeats the whole purpose of reading the Bible. Anyway.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother thing, right? Because they're trained at Princeton or some very anti-Christian theological seminary of some sort. There really is, I think, a lot of pastors. And by the way, I think you're right. A year and a half ago, let's say, people would just go to church as kind of the thing to do on Sunday, and churches shut down, and most of those people are not going to go back because why would I bother? I can do it online, or they found other things to do. So it's just
watch my show
in many cases, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, they should watch my show. It's probably as enjoyable. I will tell you, you'll burn in hell for the rest of your life, no problem. Just click like, share, subscribe. You'll burn in hell.
Smash that like button.
Right? Okay, so before I know this has been such a great conversation, and this is the biggest problem about having people that I am friends with come on the show. All of you folks are brilliant, but it just turns into just like this this one-on-one conversation. I'm trying to speak to a crowd of people, and they're just like, I don't even know what these guys are talking about right now. What are they doing? Okay, so so the ideas for your dissertation. So logic and reasoning are perfect and valid tools of analysis existing in an immaterial world. Logic and reason require an immaterial mind separate from but in control of the physical brain. Bless you.
Sorry.
I didn't know if you coughed or sneezed. I just looked up and then you're just like,
throat clearing.
Man is fallen and thus incapable of perfectly using God's tools given above, but this does not invalidate the perfection of the tools themselves. There exists a universal good to strive towards, human well-being. I agree. Man has the freedom to choose through human free will. Given those 5 basic, we'll call them assumptions for now, does that bring you to the conclusion of the Christian worldview and the capitalist worldview?
I think, like I said in the beginning, number 5 here, man has the freedom to choose through human free will. I think as far as economics goes, if you take that, the fact that man can choose for himself his own future in a way, right? And yeah, you mentioned the idea of rationalism, Austrian economics, rationalism, in terms of what people are rational, means they just choose what they believe to be their best, is in their best interest, who's going to make themselves better, right? And we could say, okay, there is a good that exists out there, that is human well-being. So if each individual is seeking the good, which is that's an axiom of Austrian economics anyways, and that they are able to choose the good, that would be a rational choice, is choosing the good. And I think underlying this is the existence of a mind which provides them with the ability to choose. And that basically, that should give people evidence of an immaterial world. And so in the dissertation I wrote out, I went into a lot more detail about evidence, we could say philosophical evidence, of the separation between the brain and the mind. Because again, if you were just a brain, you're just a chemical vat inside of flesh, then let's say Jay Richards of Catholic University, I think, he's a pretty well-known author. He's written several books. He's at the Discovery Institute. Great guy. I've spoken with him at length about this as well. And what's the term? People that think that basically think we are predetermined robots. Starts with an S. I've talked with him about this, and the fact that people actually believe that really kind of refutes itself, because they would just be predetermined to believe that they're predetermined. It really doesn't make any sense. Like it's illogical. And I think for economics to be a valid thing to even bother with, it should be self-consistent and it should be able to be consistent with your basic philosophical ideas. And that would be, I think, free will, your ability to choose freely. That is a necessary element for economic action, if you will. So kind of going through what I was saying before, but probably not as clear as I'd like to be. But yeah, going back to these tools, though, logic and reason are in and of themselves immaterial ideas, right? So if we want to say they're just creations of man, then I don't think they can be trusted. It wasn't it Darwin said, if we came from monkeys by evolution, then man cannot be trusted, right? No more than an ape. So if evolution, logic, and reason just somehow evolved with no intelligence behind them, how could you possibly trust them? So I was on the book debating with one of the guys about C.S. Lewis saying that if the brain evolved by accident with no intelligence, by chance, then how can you think anything that comes from it is somehow valid, right? So if you're going to logic and reason, if they came from the brain, which itself evolved by chance, then logic and reason make no sense. They're not valid tools, right? They're not legitimate. My analogy was, if a tornado went through a junkyard, picked up a bunch of items and turned them into an airplane, would you think that airplane is going to fly, is good to go? Would you just get in that airplane and trust it, drop it off a cliff? No, right? But that's what they're doing with logic and reason, which are underlying principles in economics. They're saying these things either evolved by chance through accident with no intelligence, or they're just man-made, and man himself evolved by accident through chance, no intelligent intervention. But still, we can trust these as valid, perfect tools that are consistent through time, right? They're applying universal ideas. And so that doesn't make, it's not a consistent worldview in my view anyways. I don't think you can use them.
Okay, so two things, critical race theory and postmodern theory. Both of these really do actually reject logic and reasoning based on what you just said. They actually do reject. Well, I'm just saying for people who are not, they legitimately reject these under those assumptions. So logic and reasoning are not to be trusted because they themselves, like Horkheimer and I think the tradition and critical theory basically said that the problem with, and this is a pragmatic problem, the problem with science and logic and reasoning is that it leads to the ultimate death of all humans, right? So he goes, why would we believe or put our trust in logic and reasoning when logic and reasoning led to the atomic bomb and World War I and World War II? Obviously, there's some failure within logic and reasoning because you shouldn't create a weapon that could destroy the entirety of humanity, which that's a different critique, but that's what he led to why we need critical theory, because it takes in historicity and stuff like that. And it was, and which led to the negative synthesis of Marxism and all that. Anyway, so,
I'd say that is the idea that reason, again, I do make this point that reason and logic are tools, right? It's like a hammer, or you could say a gun in the hands of a good person. But of course, what does good mean? Well, they don't really think there's any such thing as good, right? Good is whatever, what's the CRT's view of good is?
Actually, so in CRT, there is no designation of good because everything it's radical social constructionism. But in the idea of radical social constructionism, that now this is my belief. I know there's guys out there like James Lindsay may disagree with me on this, and he's like the expert. Which again, I don't mean quotes in a negative way. I'm just saying there are people out there that may disagree. He's the expert in this, but I disagree with him. So what I have taken is that you have the existentialists from Jean-Paul Sartre and then Heidegger and those folks, as well as the Nazi rebranding and sociology. They had encapsulated a problem which ended up happening in the postmodern world. If everything is infinitely regressively bad or everything is socially constructed, how do you have a piece of objectivity? Well, the existentialists, they had already figured this out. They'd said, well, to have objectivity, you have pain or suffering, right? So pain or suffering necessarily magnifies the reality of the world because one, it's something that everyone shares. So it is across the board, 100% the same. Everyone feels pain and everyone suffers. So that was the existentialist argument that they made. Like, okay, well, we have suffering, so we can anchor this infinitely regressive problem, bam, into suffering and pain. Then comes the postmodernist after the critical theorists. They go, well, nobody really cares about suffering and pain. That's kind of like that emo stuff over there. We're trying to be funky and goofy, and we want to attack the West. And so we just say everything's socially constructed and pain doesn't really matter because it's within the physical, but it doesn't manifest itself in the external. So it doesn't matter. It's still a function of your individual preference into the world. So it doesn't matter. Right. Well, critical race theory, which is Angela Davis, Bell Hooks, and people like that, they go, hold on. Well, we're taking the neo-romantic idea or the romantics idea from W.E.B. Du Bois. We're bringing in the existentialist of suffering. So now we have this ranking system of romanticism that comes in with W.B. Du Bois. And then we have this existentialist frame that says we have to anchor this infinitely regressive problem into the real world through pain and suffering. If we put those together, we end up getting oppression. So we can anchor this infinitely regressive social constructionism into oppression through epistemics. And now this is where it gets real wild. Why would that matter? Well, because there's a difference in the world on how individuals obtain knowledge and how knowledge is spread between the totality of knowledge. That's from Mannheim, who actually hated Horkheimer, but anyway. So you have the totality of knowledge, and then you have the disparate levels of knowledge throughout society. As long as you have these disparate levels of knowledge throughout society, those with more knowledge and the knowledge that's best, quote unquote, they oppress everyone else. By those people being oppressed, they anchor away from the social constructionism and say, this oppression, this pain, this suffering is real. Therefore, the knowledge that they have is superior to the knowledge of someone who isn't oppressed, because they're not grounded in any part of the reality. They are a manifestation of the superstructure and the ideological structure, which that came from Marx. And so that's where we get this idea of what is good is what coincides with this individual's epistemic relationship to the world. By God, that was way too much.
Wasn't Lenin said that, was it good that is an absence of opposition to socialism? Something along those lines.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. Right. That was the what he saw. That was the perfect world, I guess.
By the way, I hate to cut you off. We have a question. Well, it's a statement. It comes from a regular. Thank you. It says, people who hate religion have a poor understanding of human consciousness. I absolutely agree. I think Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, and all of them, even Kafka, I think they all kind of answered this question. What do you think?
Solzhenitsyn and his...
Oh, yeah.
So Solzhenitsyn wrote the Gulag Archipelago, and I've read his A Day in the Life of Ivan Isanovich. Mm-hmm. And one of his beautiful quotes was, well, he had a couple of them. One was, he said, "God bless the Gulag. As I lay," was it something like, "As I lay in the rotting straw, I realized that life was not about pleasure in this life. It's about preparing us for the future, right? For the next life. And if this is it, if this life is all we have, then the prison guards have won, right? The Gulag." If you guys ever want to watch a movie, a great movie, a friend of mine from Azerbaijan, he grew up in the Soviet Union, right? He fled. And he said, I think it's called The Way Back. And the beginning of it, they show life in the Gulag just a little bit. And really, if you guys understand the Gulags were run by the criminals, the murderers, because these were basically what today in modern CRT, etc., these people think that criminals are just an outcome of society. These are not actually bad people. They're just deemed bad by society. And so it's society's fault. It's not their fault, right? And so when they put them in the Gulag, they let them run the Gulag. They give them weapons. And there's a couple famous actors in this movie, by the way. And you have the political prisoners who are antisocial. And so in the Gulag, they're the lowest of low. And so Solzhenitsyn talks about how the guards would just open up the automatic weapons on them. And the actual horrible people ran the Gulags, and they could really oppress the political prisoners who had done nothing wrong. Solzhenitsyn, he was in the front in World War II. He wrote a letter to a friend of his that was intercepted, and it said some bad things about Stalin. They sent him to the Gulag for 25 years. He eventually got to the US and died of cancer. But yeah, he said that if life is about just this present life, then the guards have won. But if Christianity is true, that this is a temporary, as Solomon said, just a a breath of air, right? It's there for a moment and then disappears. Then who's to be actually pitied? It's the prison guards. Those are the people we should pity. And so I think that you look at someone who suffered more than most people in existence, and he realized how this life actually matters, how we live in this life, and so I think people should read a little bit more Solzhenitsyn and some of the just really amazing things that these people came up with in this life, and you could really apply what I said about the gulags to today, and you've got people saying we need to go back to the gulags, right? So there were some Bernie undercover cameras by Veritov showing that Bernie's fans were, we're going to bring back the gulags. As soon as Bernie gets in, we're bringing back the gulags. But roundabout way of, where was I going with that?
Well, yeah, I mean, Solzhenitsyn was one of the Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. I mean, that was, for me, one of the most powerful books to actually understand what is the relationship between our lives and existential dread, right? So it goes back to that. The existentialists, again, they had found this grounding belief in this suffering and pain because, Jordan Peterson said it best: life is suffering. It sucks. It's terrible. You need some mode of being to get out of it. And for the existentialists of Russia, it was religion. I mean, there's a reason why Russia, Greek Orthodoxy, runs that place. Is because it's such a fundamental part of being in such a bad place. And this is actually, something that I've heard people talk about. I've heard murmurings that one of the problems of modern society is that it is so good that no one actually suffers in any legitimate sense, right? So, I mean, we're talking about the ideas of oppression, but the ideas of oppression are significantly less now than what they were. And yet there seems to be more fire and brimstone in people's guts about things. And that they've lost this transcendental anchor. So with the transcendental anchor, the existentialist says, it doesn't matter how much suffering we have in this world. We have the next one that we can go to. And that was a fundamentally powerful proposition that in their minds and in many others, that it answered the question, or it answered the serious question brought to us about why do we suffer? Well, it's just temporary. We'll just move forward. Okay, so I have another comment. It says, social justice is the catalyst to mob violence. That is absolutely true.
And Molyneux made a great point in one of his talks. He said that cancel culture, which is what we're seeing, is just the warm-up for mass murder. Like, if you could separate people, get into social justice and separate people into groups. I mean, how were you able to gas 6 million Jews? By very slowly over time dehumanizing them, separating them from society, eventually getting to the point to where they were subhuman, right? Getting that in the minds of people, and then you can do whatever you want with them. It's like cannibals, right? No human eats another human. That never happens. We know it's wrong. So how do we have cannibals? Well, cannibals don't see the people they eat as people. They don't see them as equals. They see them as subhuman, right? So that's how you really get into this mass murder, is you start with social justice, and that's just the warm-up for what could eventually be some kind of mass murder, potentially, right? Right now, it's just cancel culture. It's creating these people, kicking them out of society, separating them, making them less than whatever. And then where do we go from there? Well, historically, it's not been a pretty picture.
Yeah, right. The last time it happened, a lot of people died. No, I mean, this is the atomization of the person, right? What you're talking about, getting them away from society, isolating them. This is Hannah Arendt when she wrote Totalitarianism. I mean, it's the single most profound book, again, an existentialist who rejected feminism for whatever reason. Actually thought Simone de Beauvoir was kind of stupid. So Hannah Arendt wrote that, and she said the fall into totalitarianism on the onset is started by the atomization of the person. When you remove people and isolate them from society, canceling them, this further breeds this animosity of the in-group to the out-group, right? And especially if this out-group is isolated and the out-group can't come together, right? The moment you remove the out-group from being able to stand together, it's over. At that point, you have created a secondary class, and I mean class and caste, not actually classes in like first class, second class, or rich, poor. I mean actual caste system. And once you create this caste system, which is not natural to the United States environment, and you dehumanize people to this extent, there will be possible blood. I mean, we've seen a lot of violence throughout the summer of 2020. And
they deserved it, right? That's what the saying is they,
yep.
For whatever reason, they deserved it. They deserved what they got. No matter, because, and you can talk about, well, I don't have to get into it too much, but that's the idea, is that they were fighting against social justice or whatever it is, right? But
yeah. Well, to be fair, again, this is part of my Christian principle, and I'll steal this from Milton Friedman, even though he was an atheist. If we all get I'm getting some feedback. If we all get what we deserve, then all of us would be buried, because all of us deserve damnation, to burn in hell. That's the reason Jesus Christ died on the cross. It's because we all deserve hell, but we are forgiven through the divine love from our Lord God.
Yeah.
Right? That's fundamental.
Yeah. And thankfully we don't need like forever to be repenting, and I mean, we should be repentant, right? But
yeah, it's
not like we just continually pay for our sins or something. Whereas in the modern social justice movement, you have to, especially if you're like a white male, and I'm Cherokee, but if you're a white male, then you have to continually apologize for the sins of your skin color, right? There is no forgiveness for that sin. There's no forgiveness for the sin of whatever class you're in, right? Mm-hmm. You're in that class forever. And the only way to pay penance is to be anti-racist for the rest of your life, right? And whatever that means.
Is to grovel and confess.
And literally grovel, like so.
Yeah. Which is something Christianity got rid of. Christianity said confession is between a man and his priest. And this is the Catholic. A man and his priest, you have a conversation, and he works with God to absolve you of your sins, because you have confronted that you have sinned, and you have confronted the reality of your wrongdoing, right? This is significantly different than publicly apologizing. First and foremost, Christianity kept things very hush. You didn't need to blabber about, right? So there wasn't society involved. It was you and a priest, and that was it. If either of y'all talked about what was said in that setting, excommunicado, bye, get out, done.
Yeah, legally, a priest is not he's not legally required to tell you what someone has confessed to him. Now, I don't believe in the priesthood in the Catholic Church. I'm not Catholic, but so the more Protestant Christian view is that you ask for forgiveness once, and you believe in Christ's death for all payment for all sins, all times, right, through eternity, through the I guess from the beginning to the end of time, not eternity, but just once and for all. And so we don't need to continually pay penance, right? We go to him when we sin, and we confess, but we don't need to continually pay penance. Whereas the social justice movement is, you must continually, you are never forgiven for that sin, right? That's why you have this continual, endless guilt that you have. And it's not something you didn't do anything, right? Again, it's just what skin color were you born with, right? And it's not even that, because you go back, generations, what did your forefathers look like? Where did they come from, right? So you're more guilty maybe if you came from this and that. So
yeah, no, it's an it's an objectively perverse way to play on like the historical reality of the world, right? Because history is a very brutal and terrible beast. But history is built to where we are now. If we constantly replay on the history and ask for forgiveness for something that happened in the past, or again, the worst nature of it is the unconsciousness, right? So like unconscious bias and these unconscious, like if I am not conscious of it, I cannot ask for forgiveness because it is beyond my control. It is an immaterial action, right? Like it is in the ether, and therefore I must apologize. That doesn't make any sense to me, because, and I get their argument that it's a part of the structure, and because you're in this structure, you therefore have to do XYZ. But I'm not in the structure because I have the true consciousness that comes from critical theory, blah blah blah. It's just hogwash. At the end of the day, it's how can we abuse the immaterial and say that A, it doesn't exist, which is hilarious, and then B, make you pay for the immaterial that doesn't exist, that's part of a structure that is misrepresented for you to feel bad about a thing that you didn't even do. It's insanity, but I get the argument. I understand. If I was Machiavelli, I would rewrite the Prince and I would give you social justice.
Yeah. Whatever it takes for power, right? So this kind of makes me, I wrote an essay and I applied to present at a conference for the Association of Christian Economists. And the conference was co-presented by AEI, the American Enterprise Institute. And it was not accepted. They said, hey, if you want to go a little further with this, it was like 4,000 words. So if you want to go further and develop it, then maybe they'd publish it. But I went to the conference, and ACE has extremely socialist tendencies. And one of the papers presented by a professor at SPU here was about the living wage, right? So I just thought I would bring up the paper I present. The title was "A Humane Society is One of Individuals," right? Whereas, like we're talking about here, we're talking about a society of groups. So you're no longer the economancer. You're in with the bearded, long-haired people, right? or whatever group you're in with the glass. Well, hey, by the way, if you were in Cambodia in 1973, you'd be in there with the people with glasses, right? So
yeah, yay.
Marx put you in educated off to the fields where you'd be slaughtered, right? And again, so the people don't know, the greatest terror in history was really Cambodia. They killed maybe 1/3 of the population of Cambodia was slaughtered in a short period. What was it, 4 years? 2 to 4 years by Pol Pot? And it was Marxism, right? He was trained in France. He was trained with the German society that you mentioned before, I'm blanking.
The Frankfurt
School. Yeah, he was trained in these groups. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, there you go.
So
1/3.
So I think it was about 3 to 5 million people in a 7 to 9 million person country. So, and again, it's because they looked at people as within groups. They didn't see individuals. When you get rid of the individual, you really decimate society. And by the way, it's been my view since March of 2020 that the mask dehumanizes people, and it gets rid of the individualist human nature, because no longer are you a human face, you're a piece of blue cloth. And I would be much more okay with disappearing someone with a cloth over their head than an actual human, right? And I think that's human nature. So,
well, the smile and the eyes are the gateways to the soul. So the eyes tell you the emotion, but the smile and the mouth is what allows it to be, right? So if someone smiles, you know what they believe. If someone frowns, you understand. If someone grimaces and these things, all of these facial features. I mean, we've built, if you believe in evolution, we've built our entire society off our faces, and yet we remove that.
Yes.
And we're supposed to interact at the same level. I mean,
and I don't know who people are. I was at a salesman today at the dealership, and they got the mask on, right? And I'm talking to him, and there's no face there. So when I go back, I do the test drive, I come back, I'm like, was it him? Was it him? Right? So
Right.
I'm trying to remember who it was, because I don't remember what he looked like, really. And I think that this is really all coming together. Right? It wasn't until May of 2020 that really CRT and cultural Marxism really took hold. Right at the end of May, when you had the George Floyd riots and the protests and all the stuff that were surrounding that.
All right. Well, it's getting late. It's been an hour and 10 minutes. I'm sure you're tired of hearing me because I'm tired of hearing you. I'm kidding. I will invite you on. We'll probably pick a topic similar. I don't think it'll be the same topic because I don't know. It might be. Who knows? This actually, to be fair, this actually got a lot of buzz. Surprisingly enough, we had 5 viewers at one point in time. We still have 2. Nice. Yeah, I know, right? It's crazy. This is. Hey,
I like the comments. You got a follower. That's great.
Oh yeah,
I wanted to start a channel. I've been thinking about it for years. I just never did. So, props on you for getting one going.
I mean, I had to. I have. I have too much to say, and I need to say it. Okay, somebody's got to hear me. And when coronavirus happened, I spent 7-8 months in isolation. I'm an extrovert. When I do the things that I do, which a lot of people, those who know me know, but those who don't, when I go out and I do the things that I do, I am there. I'm typically in the front of the class doing the thing, right? And so when I was removed from that's hard for a person like me. Maroon Rider 700, you guys should do radio. Maybe. I'm actually funny you should say that. I'm actually in talks with some people about a radio station. Trying to get out there. We'll see. I don't know how it'll go, but it's going to be something that we're going to be doing. So within the next week or so, by the way, shoot me that paper that you're working on. I may want to jump on it with you. I may want to do that.
The Humane Society?
Yes, and I might put it in latex that you use Word like a dirty.
I can put it in PDF.
You plebe. No, I mean, shoot it to me in Word. Actually, I can convert it right over to LaTeX, and I can shoot it to you back. And then if you have your Overleaf account that you should be making, I'm looking at you.
I actually have. Okay, I made an account there, and I'm trying to figure out how to put this to that.
I can put it into Overleaf, and I can send you that Overleaf so that you can just pop it in there and you won't have to deal with it, and you can have it, and we can use it on my account. I'll talk to you the rest of this later. Anyway, guys, everyone listening, I hope you enjoyed. We should be doing more. I've got a few video ideas coming up. I got one that's going to be coming out soon. It's going to be on inequality aversion and risk aversion and how those work together. I have another video review that I'm going to be doing from this feminist conference on the 3 paradoxes of neoliberalism. I actually might bring you on for that because I think you might enjoy that for the third part. And then I've got another video up on that's getting ready to come out. All of this is getting worked on. This takes a lot of hours to actually go through some of this stuff. Sadly, I don't know all of it off the top of my head. But another video is going to be on the Chicago School of Sociology, which is really the sociological, ecological school and how that works. So if you want to hear more, please like, share, subscribe, comment. Comments work the best for the algorithm. I don't know why, like views and likes don't actually, but the comments actually spur most of the algorithmic growth.
Shows interaction, I think. Shows the algorithm that there's people that actually care enough to.
Sure.
Smashing that like button's pretty easy, but to actually type something out.
Fair enough, but the one video that I have with the most views, I think it's got like 400 views, is the one on Richard Wolff. I'm actually ratioed pretty hard in that video, And 90% of the comments are basically, I'm stupid. I had one guy say, well, you don't know what you're talking about. What's your degree? It's just like, it doesn't matter what my degree is. Either I'm right or I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I have one against the Robert Reich and his $15 an hour, that little scribble thing he does. I got a part one, part two. Somebody had a couple comments on that.
Time out. Okay, so we just received I'm confused. We received a comment. What's going on here? Christ Christian. Mammon worship is blasphemy. Capitalism is mammon worship. Why would we have privatization of natural resources and tax subsidized private business? So I guess I'm going to start off I don't know why we would have mammon worship as capitalism. Again, capitalism existed in the days of Christianity, in early Christianity. The church fathers, from a Roman Catholic perspective, they understood at least the basic tenets of capitalism, which is the free exchange of goods and services and how we allocate resources through capital. This was totally understood. I think you're kind of misdirecting what may be some common like consumer-based capitalism issues into blasphemy, but capitalism I have no idea.
Capitalism is the worship of capital. Is that what you said?
Yeah, essentially, yes, which it is not. Capitalism, depending on the definition, we come from two different schools of thought, him and I, but mine, it's the allocation of resources and their alternative uses. And from my work in economic sociology, it is the sociological principles of the market and the interaction and social actions garnered by resource constraints, right? So how we in society exist within this.
And you can boil it down in terms of, if you want to say, okay, capitalism, or maybe just free market ideas. And it's just the private ownership of the means of production. You could simplify it something like that. And that has, as you said, that's existed for all of time. Private individuals own private property, and that is the necessary, right? You cannot exchange, you cannot trade, you cannot give things away if you don't own anything. So just fact, he said something. What did he say? It said something about how can we own private resources?
Yeah, private natural resources.
Private resources.
Well, I'll tell you this. So individual, and again, we're not trying to take anything out on you. What we're saying is, so why would we have a privatization of natural resources? All right. So first, privatization allows individuals to first and foremost invest in these natural resources, right? So if we're talking about, let's take fossil fuels, for example, the privatization of fossil fuels and the chasing of profits have allowed individuals to continuously invest in them and grow them so that they can be more and more efficient because they want more and more profits. So at the end of the day, the social welfare function of us doing better is motivated by this profit mechanism. That optimality makes the world a better place because by making things more efficient and more better, we've allowed ourselves to continuously move forth and to continuously march down this idea that we can do better in the eyes of our Lord. So if you want to be charitable, socialism isn't charitable because socialism breeds this incompatible incentive program, right? And that's not going to help the poor. Whereas what helps the poor is having people become very rich and create all of the things that exist. Financially efficient isn't efficiency. I'm talking about the actual use of the goods and resources, right? So when I'm saying efficient, I mean that a car that was built in the 1970s used how much gas per mile versus a car built now. This has continuously been an efficiency gain through technological advancement. And these technological advancements are garnered by this profit-seeking mechanism, right? That is the purpose of it. That is how growth happens. It's called the endogenous growth theory. But what it means is technology and economic growth comes from within the system by going forward. Yes, they use less because it's more efficient.
Yeah, and you mentioned oil, but I would also point out that, as it's been said, well, you could was it Churchill said capitalism was the unequal sharing of good, and socialism is the equal sharing of misery, and that's what happens in socialism. So if everybody owns everything, nobody owns it, right? Because nobody takes care of things they don't own. So if you don't have private property, private ownership of resources, you're not really going to have resources because nobody's going to take care of it. Nobody takes, where is all of the pollution in this world? It's in places that are not privately owned. It's in the ocean, it's in the rivers, it's in lakes, it's in things that are not privately owned by individuals, right? Because nobody takes care of them, because nobody cares. Where do you dump your garbage if you're going to dump it somewhere? Your backyard? No, you dump it on public land, or, that is the people that want to pollute, or they don't want to take it to the dump. They just find a place to dump it, right? So if you don't have private ownership, you're going to have a really horrible society. You're going to have a really, if you look around the world, places that do not have private ownership of resources, these are the most environmental disasters, right? These are the worst places in terms of environmental and human, the human element of society. These are the worst places on earth.
Absolutely. And also all of these places tend to actually reject Christianity far more than any legitimate. Okay, so let me take a step back. If you're looking for an area with high Christianity and high Christian values, the closer you are to, I guess you could say, the natural state of capitalism, the closer you are to an actual Christian ideal. The moment you move into a place of socialism, you necessarily typically reject Christianity. I think the more inequality and risk averse a society is, the more likely they are to have higher numbers of atheists. And there is some level of correlation to that. So
I think it goes back to what we were talking about, is Christianity believes in the individual. Capitalism is about the individual. So if you go to Adam Smith, he was trying to figure out why are nations rich, right? We call it Wealth of Nations. It's an inquiry into the cause and nature of the wealth of nations. And he found that nations are rich because they have individuals. Basically, government allows individuals to be individuals. And that's Christian societies, Western civilization built on Christian principles of individual rights and the fact that the individual exists. Whereas you go to more Eastern societies like India or China pre and during Mao, and a lot of those countries, they didn't really believe in the individual, and they were not successful. It wasn't until they brought in properties from Western society that they grew economically, and the individual people got better off. And so it's really because you base these ideas on Christian principles of private property.
okay, so the comment is the globe is capitalist because they exploit resources, actually, and it's purely based on resource availability. Okay, so first and foremost, the globe is not capitalist. The global hegemon, which is the West, is partially capitalist. So it's internally not capitalist. And I guess you could say in a strict sense. Now it's a mixed economy. The world is a mixed economy. That is true. But whether or not the domestic country is more like shareholder or stakeholder, or I guess you could say cutthroat or cuddly capitalism, is entirely a political point, right? So where is not capitalist? China, North Korea. North Korea, really big one. I mean, they're all starving. They're 14 years old at 5'2", 60 pounds. It's terrible. Venezuela is not a capitalist. Chile is not a capitalist. Cuba, none of those are capitalists.
Yeah, and they were well off, right? So you look at Rhodesia was the breadbasket, or Zimbabwe was the breadbasket of Africa. Mugabe, a Marxist dictator, comes in, destroys the country. Venezuela, the most successful country in South America, right? Chavez comes in, socialista. He called it socialism. He was going to bring socialism to Venezuela. Destroys the most successful country in Latin America. Chile, the Chicago boys came in, turned Chile into an economic success. That eventually goes away. They move towards socialism. They've been just economically falling, right? Do I need to go through countries? China was one of the poorest countries on earth, right? They had what, 95% of their population lived on $1 or $2 a day, something like that. As they brought in the Western ideas of individualism and the idea, they don't have private property, but they brought in the idea of private property, and they allowed individuals to be individuals and to pursue entrepreneurial activity. And China reduced the abject poverty in China by 95%.
Hold
right?
on. Time out. Okay, so you do not understand what the Lord's name in vain means. I am not using the Lord's name in vain. I'm not begging for anything in return. So that's not what the Lord's name in vain means. Secondly, I'm not appropriating a religion to push my agenda. You don't know what my agenda is. This is a show that I discuss many, many topics, including postmodernism, social justice, socialism, and communism. So at the end of the day, you have no idea what my beliefs are. You should watch some of my other videos because it may allow you to understand. Third, they are not capitalism unless you maneuver the definition of capitalism around. By that notion, every country is capitalist. So what we're specifically talking about is this. No, my agenda. Okay. So what we're specifically talking about here is knowing that Christianity is a mostly libertarian philosophy founded on the individual, right? And the autonomy of that individual through his divine right with the Lord. Capitalism says you are divine in your individual state, therefore go out and do something. Socialism, by virtue, necessarily removes that and says there is sharedness, which is incompatible with the Bible. You can read Colossians, Corinthians, both of those specifically lay out the absolute abject rejection of anything close to socialism. So that is first and foremost when we're talking about the Bible. That's specifically what we mean. And so at the end of the day, I don't want to push this too far because look, thank you for your comments, and I'm not trying to be mean, and I don't want to be rude, and if it comes off that way, I don't mean it to. Honestly, I do value the comments that you're giving me, but I don't think that you're understanding what I'm trying to say. And what the Lord's name in vain means is to ask God given a false heart. So God, please forgive me, or God, save me from this drinking and driving, and I'll swear to you, I will never drink again. And then you get home because God guided you, and then 2 nights later, you're drunk again. That's using the Lord's name in vain. You're calling upon something with a false heart. I truly believe in what I believe with the fullness of my heart. And it's something that I will continuously try to bring about this philosophy that I am slowly creating over time, and how it intertwines with my relationship with the Lord. It's not something that I try to go out and shove down people's throats. I've done some of my missionary work and stuff like that, but this really isn't here. But this is something that I share with Nelson, who's been my friend for quite a long time.
I think Dennis Prager has pointed out, he's Jewish and I believe he speaks Hebrew, but he said that if you go back to the Hebraic meaning of the word, it's to carry the Lord's name in vain, or that is like using the Lord's name to do evil, like, killing people in the name of God or something like that. And I definitely don't think any of us have done that. So I don't even know what it means by using the Lord's name in vain.
Asking is not a synonym of a request, and prayers aren't requests nor incantations. Man, I don't know what to say about that, because that is almost denominationally based, right? So I don't think you could propose that to like an Orthodox. I don't think that they would buy that, because the mysticism involved of prayer is such a strong formation. It is essentially an incantation of your belief system with God. Um, because you said prayer is a vocabulary. No, prayer is an actual manifestation of your spiritual link with the Lord, right? When you are in prayer, you have the spirit of the Lord over you. So when you are in prayer, you are manifesting that conversation directly with God through the Holy Spirit.
I would also, he did say something about capitalism is the subsidization of private business, but I think capitalism is not in fact, capitalism is the opposite of the subsidization. It's to allow private businesses to be private businesses, not subsidize them. Right? Now, that is an issue we take with kind of cronyism or capitalism or crony capitalism, where the government subsidizes its favorite businesses. Tesla, for instance, right, to the tune of 10 or 20 billion dollars that they've given Tesla just for the cars alone. Plus I have so many problems with Tesla. Is the anti-capitalist company in my mind.
The primary purpose is to tax peasants. I think you're misconstruing capitalism with feudalism, because first and foremost, I know of no peasants. I don't know a single peasant. In fact, my mother was probably the closest thing I've ever seen to a peasant in the United States. And yeah, it's how the aristocracy invokes their design. At some point, I don't know if I'm being trolled, so I'm going to leave it there.
I think he's trying to take us off course, but
right, because there's the aristocracy of the United States is considerably different than the aristocracy of feudalism, and feudalism and capitalism are two fundamentally different things, because feudalism didn't have private property, and capitalism does. So,
yeah, and I think what we were saying here is, at least my point, some of the points I had made, is that we're kind of moving away from capitalism in the United States through these various cultural movements, cultural Marxism, and we're moving towards feudalism. And I think maybe we could talk about that at length.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
we're having like a monopolization of certain sectors through the government. The government, you look at the lockdowns. What has the lockdown done? It's really crushed the middle class in favor of government's favorite individuals.
Yeah. By the way, Gordon, if you can prove creation as a scientific fact, absolutely. My email and everything like that is in my little channel bio. You can just go on there. You can shoot it to me. I'll bring it up. We'll have a whole conversation. I'll bring you on. That's fine.
Well,
if you want to.
As far as creation, it's separate, but I think it's an element of my beliefs.
Sure. It'll be a fun conversation. I'm not opposed to it. Send it, link it to me. You can go on my channel. You should have all the relative links. You can post it in the about section or the discussion section. I look forward to it. But yeah, I gave everybody a brief overview of the videos that are going to be coming out soon. So it's inequality and risk aversion. It's going to be the Chicago School of Sociology, and then the 3 paradoxes of neoliberalism. And then possibly Gordon Fiala is going to be coming on, and then I'll be getting back with NelsoNomics, and then probably next week you should expect me and the NyQuil economist to finish off the Robert Reich video. So guys, there's a lot of stuff coming. It's going to be hitting like a train. Like, share, subscribe, comment. Tell me down in the box below.
Check out my website.
Yeah, check out his. He's going to shoot me that. He's going to be shooting me that. I want y'all to go shoot him some love, and tell him how terrible of a person he is, because honestly, bad things work better than good things. And, we'll bear our crosses, because that's what we do. I hope all of you have a wonderful and blessed day. Thank you, Nelson. I enjoyed it so much.
It's been fun. It's always fun chatting. Take care.
All right. Bye.